Good morning. My name is Kimberly King. I am a religious of the Sacred Heart, and I have been asked to introduce Dr. Delio for today. Ilia Delio is a Franciscan sister of Washington, D.C., and currently holds the Josephine C. Connolly Endowed Chair in Theology at Villanova University. A native of Newark, New Jersey, she earned doctorates in both pharmacology from Rutgers University School of Healthcare and Biomedical Sciences and in historical theology from Fordham University in New York. She is the recipient of a Templeton Course in Science and Religion Award and the author of 22 books, including The Unbearable Wholeness of Being, which won the 2014 Silver Nautilus Award and a Catholic Press Association Book Award. Other books include Care for Creation, The Emergent Christ, and Making All Things New, Catholicity, Cosmology, and Consciousness, nominated for the 2018 Grand Mayor Award. Her books have been translated into Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, Polish, and German. In 2015, she became general editor of a new book series by Orbis called Catholicity in an Evolving Universe, and there are currently 10 books scheduled for publication. She lectures nationally and internationally on topics including evolution, artificial intelligence, consciousness, culture, and religion. Dr. Delio's work is influenced by Jesuit scientist Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, who devoted his spiritual writing to bridging Christianity and evolution. Like Teilhard, she sees the essential need to integrate science and religion toward a new way of thinking, consonant with evolution, complexity, emergence, quantum reality, and artificial intelligence. Her work has a wide public audience and can be found on the website Christogenesis.org. A warm Atlantic Canada welcome to Dr. Ilia Delio. Thank you very much for being here with us for this day. Thank you very much.
Thanks. I have my little clock. Always a teacher. Well, good morning, good people of Canada. I finally made it. I was reminded this morning that we began this journey almost 10 years ago, Prince Edward Island, and stick around long enough and things happen. That's one of So, listening just briefly to the works that you're involved in is really inspiring. I think women religious, women and men, but the work you're doing in ecology and justice, social justice, the work of reparation, of the awareness that the lands that we stand on once belong to a people who have been here long before us. Just awareness of that is a step forward for humanity. We're living in a very, very troubled time, but very challenging time. And it depends how you see these through the window. What do you see when you look out at the world? Do you see a world that's falling apart and that is, kind of shredding? Or do you see a world that's forming? And in a sense, that's going to be our journey today. Just a little bit for those of you who may not know me, I started out as a scientist, bachelor's, master's, doctorate in science. The very last thing I ever thought I would be is a theologian. Really, if someone said, you're going to be a theologian one day, I said, what is that? What is a theologian? Well, here I am. So, I've given up planning. I just sort of go where the energy of the Spirit moves me, and it's a lot better, believe me. My dream was always I was in ALS research, so Lou Gehrig's disease, and related pathologies of Alzheimer's disease. And my dream was to find the cure. Now I hope I can find the cure just to get up in the morning and have an alive spirit. So things change, and that's good. I was a very, very traditional Catholic, super traditional, that I entered a very strict Carmelite monastery right after my graduate school in pharmacology, literally leaped from the classroom into the cloister. And I don't know what I was thinking. I probably had my first head concussion then. But 4 years later, as I was trying to dig my way, under the fence to get out of the cloister, I realized that the life that I was living didn't really jive with this whole notion of incarnation, that God became flesh. God so loved the world that God entered into it. So I spent a lot of time trying to reconcile those things and wound up with Franciscans. I thought it was going to be temporary. Now it's, 38 years later or something. So again, it's just been an amazing career, an amazing journey to come here today to talk to you about seeking wholeness in an age of fragments. And that's, in a sense, where I want to begin, and that's the world that we're living in today. You, more than I, know that it is a world that's on a precipice. I mean, global warming is real, and it's getting warmer. It's not going away. And it is alarming that we have so much data, and there's so many efforts now to turn this tide. It's not really turning, and that's disturbing. And we know the effects of global warming are such that sea levels are rising, animals are being forced out of their ecological niches. Animal extinction now has been well known for quite some time. We've known this stuff. Thomas Berry wrote beautifully and forcefully about this, as many others did, since the 80s and 90s. And I think to myself, how is this possible that we can have this knowledge for 30, 40 years, and here we are with things getting worse and not better? So the systems are not changing, and we have to face that reality. The systems are not changing, and if they are changing, they're so slow, it's not sufficient enough to reach the critical threshold for sustainability. So we are facing a future of a questionable, sustainable future. How did we get to a planet in crisis? Because if we go back to the indigenous spiritualities and the beauty, I have a student, a doctoral student from Africa, and he said to me, for so long I've struggled with Western theology and the way it boxes everything into this hierarchy. And he said, I come from a culture of Ubuntu, where everything is interconnected. And he said, when I discovered process theology, where relationality is the core of how we think about everything, he said, I came home. And so we have kind of a way of thinking that has been woven in to especially the Western mind that is very structured and hierarchical and power-oriented. And therefore, I think really we have a planet in crisis because we are a people in crisis. I was coming over, one of the things why I do like long plane rides is that I get to watch movies. And so I saw this a really incredible movie called Canal Street, about a young black boy who is charged with the murder of a white boy in Chicago. And this kid was a good kid. He didn't do it. His father was a lawyer and defended him. It's really an incredible story of how he went to prison, etc. But racism, genderism, the white supremacy, the over and over again, the oppositions we find ourselves in. And there's something about us that has come undone. And that's really what I want to understand. Not so much, well, I do want to understand what's come undone, but I also understand what's the power within us to go forth in a new way. Because I don't think we're just falling apart. I think we might be falling forward. So I want to, I don't want to leave on a, oh no, what are we going to do? I want to say, oh, now we know what we're going to do. So stick with the program. Don't get too down. I go back to that word Catholicity, because today we live in the, the spiritual but not religious milieu, the kind of like you don't want to be too tribal about, religious language in the midst of a pluralistic milieu. But Catholicity is a word that wasn't even Catholic, right? So it was really coined by the Greeks, because the Greeks were observers of the cosmos. You can just imagine, I don't know if you've been to Greece, but I flew over there for one day as I was going somewhere else. And the beauty of the mountain, kind of like Canada, a little bit. The beauty of the water and the mountains and the sky, and you look out and you think, wow, where am I in this whole incredible panorama of cosmic beauty? And the word Catholicity comes from the term kata holos, meaning according to the whole. It's having an awareness of the whole. So you don't have to be Catholic to have Catholicity. You just have to have an awareness of the whole. And that's, in a sense, this whole, this is the universe, actually, that our theology, our Western theology in particular, was based on. And you can see that this cosmos was beautiful, not just the colors of blue and yellow, but it's kind of, you could see its geometry. It's circular. The Earth is the center here. The planets circulating around the Earth with the sun as well, and then covered by the stars. And you could feel kind of safe in this cosmos. Look where it is. And you go, wow, I know where I stand here. I stand at the center of this cosmic beauty. Isn't that beautiful? It is. And so the Hebraic cosmos is very similar. Excuse me, I'm sorry about the bottle, but it's from the airport. So my apologies, but I do need a little water. You can see here, very much like the Greek cosmos, the Earth is the center, God is above, because now we bring religion to this. So in fact, it's the Greek cosmos that awakened the sense of transcendence, like there's something beyond. And that beyond became expressed in the experience of the personal beyond, personal transcendence, which became the name God, the illuminative one. And so God is above, earth center, and the great deep below. So we have this notion, and we still have it, because I still hear it in language, the way things are spoken. God is, we picture God as one, not you, because you all look very illumined and enlightened, but a lot of people picture God as a great big being, sort of like the Wizard of Oz, And God is like a geometer. God has planned everything here. God has a plan. How many times I've heard that? God has a plan. Well, that's God the geometer. God planning everything. And, we developed this idea that God is a plan, and then it fell. That plan got messed up, largely by Eve, excuse me, who then lured poor Adam. And then you know how that story goes. The whole garden went corrupt, and it's been a long journey out of a garden that went haywire. And we're trying to make our way back to God, back to that geometer, back to that God who has a plan. Even my undergraduates say God has a plan. I'm like, well, can God let us know what the plan is? Because we'd really like to know, And the fact is, what if God doesn't have a plan? Whitehead said God does not have a plan, God has a vision. And that's what the Bible is about, a vision, not a plan. There's no plan. But God sees what the possibilities are, right? There's God's a dreamer. And so we see what could possibly be ahead of us. This worldview, in a sense, took a turn in the period that's now known as modernity, late Middle Ages into modernity. And that is basically we know Thomas Aquinas, may he rest in peace. He was a brilliant man. He was brilliant. He had this whole understanding of existence and the way that existence is ordered, and God as that most simple of existence itself, the essence of everything. And he laid this out in such a way. Now, you know that most of Thomas's understanding of philosophy comes from Aristotle, but through the Islamic commentator Avicenna. So we share philosophically a lot of understanding of being with the Muslims. I mean, and the Jews, actually. That whole period of time, Jew, Muslim, Christian, they were all kind of reading the same philosophers. So that's really interesting, right? And here's the thing, and I just want to put a PS here. We're coming out of it's a biblical tradition, and then all of a sudden we come to a way of rationalizing what Jesus is about, and then we philosophize what Jesus is about. And the one thing I've thought recently is, have we lost Jesus, in this whole mix? Because Scripture, I mean, when you read Scripture and what Jesus is about, it's hard to put that together with, this kind of very highly abstract philosophy, that's making its way to utter simplicity, utter immutability, utter omniscience, utter omnipotence. I'm like, is that Jesus? I mean, how do these two things fit together, right? Well, we've made them fit together. It's called the church, but but we have to really come back to that one. In any event, Nicholas Copernicus, in the late 14th century, I think, was an astronomer. So observance. So always observe the cosmos. If you're not sure where you're going, look at the stars, right? So he's looking and he says, oh my gosh, it looks like we're not the center here. It looks like we might be moving according to my calculations. And of course, Copernicus was quite nervous about publishing those findings. So like the good tooth fairy, he buried them under his pillow. And he was a good friend to the Pope, actually. And he knew that his findings could be very, very disruptive. So it took a number of years, but then others like Tycho Brahe and Kepler, confirmed these observations that we are not the center of the cosmos. Well, this became very alarming because it began to be recognized that we are in a cosmic shift here, known as heliocentrism, that the sun is center, and we are now moving with the other planets around the sun. That slight shift of movement really put a huge kind of stop, like it was red light, stop, do not go, Now, you have to remember that the rise of modern science coincides with the rise of the Protestant Reformation. So, the church, the Catholic Church, was feeling threatened on all sides. And you know what that happened, again, that's like, right? It's like, oh no, we're not going here. So the church did not really accept heliocentrism, but neither did it reject it, right? And that's always where the church is with regard to science. It doesn't fully embrace it, but it doesn't fully reject it, which was really interesting. What the church was really concerned about was you make sure that we're the authority of the deposit of faith, all right? We're the true deal. So don't go with Luther and those Calvin guys and all those other kooks out there. So Galileo came along and said, this is great. Copernicus is absolutely right. We are moving around the sun. And Galileo was a very known as the father of modern science, and used tools and measurements to say, yep, this is true. His affirmation of the two books, the book of Copernicus and the book of, the book of nature, the book of scripture, basically landed him in house arrest in Florence. So it wasn't the worst thing, if you're going to go on house arrest, go to Florence, Italy. I think one of the greatest stopgaps in our own age is right here. We have yet to reconcile modern science and religion. We still, to this day, on all levels of our systems, educationally, we separate these things, right? The sciences are on one end of the campus, the humanities are on another end of the campus. So that a student majoring in theology may never go through one day of understanding what the cosmos is about, or what science has to tell us. Most of the theology learned is from the patristic and the medieval period. On the other hand, science has been taking off at an accelerating rate as if religion is just irrelevant. It doesn't matter, like it's just old, outdated, mythical ideas, and it's more of an obstacle than anything else. And this is our deep fault line right here. Unless these two areas really come together and share their knowledge, we're not talking about making them the same, but each of them looks at the world through a particular way of understanding. We need both ways of understanding. We need to understand how things are working to understand why things are working at all, right? Purpose and meaning go hand in hand with, what is it about? So the what and the why belong together. And yet we're still reluctant here. Pope Francis in Laudato Si is trying to move in this direction. If you read Laudato Si, it's the first encyclical that really begins with an awareness of the environment. Like, hello, we live on planet Earth, and it's not doing well, right? But then, if you go to the theology of the encyclical, and it's mixed. We're still, there's a Thomism that's wedded through it, and then there's an anthropocentrism there as well. We're still the noble center of the universe. We're still special because we're made humans in the image of God. And it's like, Francis, I know you want to go where you want to go, but the other guys don't want to go where you want to go. So that's why you have to write these things, right? So it's a lot of political maneuvering to try to get something like that going. And that's part of the problem, I think, of the church today. We know that this rift between science and religion was not so much the churches themselves. In fact, many scientists, in the Middle Ages and into modernity, they were religious people. Many of them did science precisely because of their religious beliefs. It was because God is creator that is worth to know this creation in its natural beauty, in its wisdom, in its incredible awesomeness. It's really this guy who messed things up. René Descartes was really a neurotic of some sort. A Jesuit-trained mathematician and philosopher. And one of those one of those OCD types, I really need to know, something with, I got to make sure it's true. How am I going to know it's true? And so he says, if the earth is moving, how can anything out there provide any level of certainty if everything's changing, right? So he said, really, the one thing that doesn't change is my own thinking self. I know that I exist, and that's an irrefutable fact. And therefore, that's my first point of certainty, that I exist. Everything else, who knows, So he separates the mind and matter, the body and the soul. And it's really, it was actually in its own kind of unique way, a trying to hold together a sense of the whole. In other words, my thinking self can, in a sense, make the rational decisions that hold the whole together. But it didn't hold together, really. In fact, after Descartes, if you even look at what happens in the history of science, science itself becomes just mere stuff. It's just stuff. It's like animal dissection, for example, became really, it's just awful what people would do, because it's just like, well, this is just an animal, tear it apart, rip it up. And we did all sorts of gruesome things, to animal life and natural life. And Descartes really plays a significant role in the rise of modern philosophy. We live in a world that's really been shaped by modern philosophy. In fact, most of our problems they're less theological than they are philosophical. And it's hard to get our heads around that because we don't wake up thinking, oh, we have a philosophical, existential crisis. But that's exactly, I think, what we have. After Descartes, I think what we can find is what Ian McGilchrist calls a divided brain. Now, by that he means that once we began separating ourselves from the world of matter, and we became sort of locked into ourselves. Now the brain, just as little, this is really not, if you hope you're known here as a neuroscientist, because this is not the best, anatomical sketch of things. But you get the sense that the brain has two major hemispheres, the left and the right. And they usually work together by a band called the corpus callosum. It's like a band of fibers. It's like a major bridge, by which everything is flowing from one side to the other. And according to, just so you know, the left brain is the analytical brain. That's the brain that does logic, reason, your wordles, your control thing. It breaks things down into bits to analyze. The right brain is the brain that's attached more to the body. It's the brain of the senses, the emotions, the wider field of creativity. And so basically, if you were to have this whole thing operating, the senses take in information, kind of the right brain, and then it moves to the left brain, kind of processes those things, sort of like your food processor, breaks it up into little bits, and then it goes back to the right brain, and the whole thing says, oh, that's a globe. And that's how we do things. every millisecond of every minute of every day, the brain is operating like this. Now, McGilchrist says, with the Cartesian dualism, we retreated from that right brain connection because the starting point becomes then rationality, the abstract, the thinking process. And so basically we are half-brained, not you, but we as a kind of a general, very general statement of things. We're cut off. We've become cut off. And you listen to how people talk about things. Look at the data in the news. It's all about data, right? It's all about breaking things down. What's the analytics? What's the data? What's the method? Everything's methodological. What's your methodology? And so we're not good at how's your feeling? What are you experiencing? What are you visualizing? Now, I know we're getting back into those things, but we're going to have to kind of bring this into how technology has built on this little Cartesian thing here. Newton, Sir Isaac Newton, built on Descartes' world. So we're coming out of a Newtonian mechanistic universe. That's the universe that really shaped us for the last 500 years. And basically, it was a world of lawfulness, laws of gravity, laws of motion, laws of how matter works. But the world was like a big machine. One giant machine, and you just find your place in the machine, like what's your part in this machine. And so Newton's world was like, you do your part, and the big machine just keeps on humming, right? If you fail in your part, we'll just replace you with another part, that's all. You're replaceable. And so we never, we kind of lost sight, like every person has a unique gift to add to this incredible machine. We call this the God of gaps, and I often say that Newton's world worked very good for religious life, especially pre-Vatican II religious life, right? So, everyone had their place in the refectory, everyone had their place in the chapel, everyone had their work assignments. So, the poor lowly novice or postulant who walks into the refectory and sits in Mother Superior's seat, needless to say, she was out the door the next day, right? She didn't have a vocation, like you messed it up. So, and we're still kind of like this. Everyone sits in this, even my students are a little bit like this, right? Everyone sits in the same seat. There's a comfortability, like we land in this pattern. And if you ever want to do an exercise, change seats every half hour or so, right? Because we don't like change. We like to be stable. We like to know what our place is. Newton's world was very comfortable, very predictable, very controllable. I know my place. I know where I'm supposed to be. I know how long I'm going to be here. I don't have to do anything else. I don't have to think too much, right? That's not good, all right? You should want change. You should want to be disturbed over and over and over. And like, oh, that's exhausting, you say. Oh, my thought of it. That's because we're thinking out of Newton's world. And so when the level of your awareness changes, you start to change a new reality, right? You start to acquire a new way of doing things. So that's the one thing we have. We have a challenge to still get out of Newton's world. It's still wanting to control us. In fact, if I were to take a guess today, our systems are very Newtonian. Our educational systems, think of those. So a kid majors in biology, but you never major just in biology. You major in cell biology. And then you never just stay in cell biology. You major in red blood cell biology. And then you narrow that down, you winnow it down to the fact that you're studying like a single proton on a single membrane of a single red blood cell in a single mitochondria or something. And it's like you write a book and maybe 2 other people can read it because you're so hyper-specialized that we have really nothing to say to anything except for those who know our thing. This is a problem. So Newtonian kind of educational systems is a problem for a world that has complexified. We have incredibly come into multi-layered relationality. So you put a kid out into the world, and that's why they're stressed. It's like, how do I think in these levels of multiplicity when I'm trained to think in the level of hyper-specialization? Right? I know what I can do. I don't know how to think across these terrains of complexity. So today we are beginning to realize that education has to shift. And you probably have heard that even some humanities are being, now this is really, I think, terrible thing, but there are schools that are actually closing their humanities programs. That, like I can tell you 3 universities in the US where they are eliminating all the humanities. And that's a problem. Right? That is a problem because there's something about us that's really changing fast. And humanities keep us human. They kind of deepen what we are, right? So we're going to have to think about that and how are we going to go forth there. Anyway, all this to say, we are not in Newton's world. We're in Einstein's world. Actually, we're even past Einstein. But, this is our universe. And this is just a 2-dimensional sketch of it, but it's an incredible universe. It is a vast universe. It is an old universe of about 13.8 billion years old. Billion years. Who could possibly get their heads around these large numbers, these large dimensions? We don't really know how this universe came into existence. There's all sorts of theories because basically our mathematics breaks down at a certain point and we can only trace it back so far. We call it the singularity. And there's all sorts of speculations. Did we emerge out of another universe? Are we one of many universes? Be kind of cool to think that our universe is actually like entangled with another universe. What if we're mirroring life in another universe? Wouldn't that be really awesome? Okay, no more sci-fi. So our universe is, it began as a hot something, hot, dense material that rapidly inflated. And again, these are working theories. So one thing about science, because people say, oh, no, they discovered this. Well, yeah, hello, because science, that's what it does. It keeps discovering. So I want to just say that in science, all knowledge is provisional. It's constantly, in a sense, it keeps finding things. That's the beauty of science. It keeps discovering. So we can just say that this began as a hot, dense something that began to rapidly expand. And then it began to cool, and the cooling is part of the expansion process, and therefore most of the energy in this universe is dark energy, which no one knows what it's about, called dark energy, and some of it is dark matter. So here we are. This is the amazing thing. Here we are, after 13.8 billion years of cosmic life and about 4.2 billion years of terrestrial life, because our little planet Earth really probably comes from an asteroid collision. You know, we erupt, actually we emerged probably out of a cataclysmic cosmic event, and began in like a little hot sulfur pool, you know, somewhere probably in New Zealand or something. And here we are. I mean, is that not amazing? That we could even think about this, that we could even know it in some ways. And so, you know, one thing we realize is that this is a world of energy. One thing that Einstein, he was pretty incredible, and I always think, you know, if you really have a boring job, don't give up hope. I mean, because he was a dreamer, he was a mathematician, and he was a doodler, and I think he just kept working on equations to really say, nope, Newton wasn't quite right, and here's how I see things, you know. Energy. So what we're saying is that all matter is a form of energy. And I think we're kind of knowing this in some way, but we kind of don't yet, right? And the fact is, where there's energy, you really can't pin things down and like put a grasp on them. Energy is strange, it's relational, it's, you know, it's this and that. It's what we call quantum, right? Quantum energy are these little packets of energy that can act like particles and waves, and we're not sure what they are. So energy exists like in superimposed fields. And therefore, the only way we can really know what something is if we observe it. So scientists began to realize in the early 20th century that this is an observer-dependent universe, that we can't say what anything is without the act of consciousness. And so this wave-particle duality has even been used recently to describe what we're about. We're like wave particles, right? We're here and there. We exist in a particular location, but we're extended and we're interrelated with everything else. And it's really quite interesting. You know, this is a much more exciting universe than Newton's Legos, you know, than the kind of building blocks of Newton's universe. And so what, you know, philosophers and physicists have shown us in this world of energy is that it's not only interactive, it's entangled. Entangled is a great word that I'm beginning to use more and more because it means once things have interacted, like say two particles, right? And then you split these particles apart. And you place a particle here, like on this podium in Halifax, and one on the planet Venus. If I turn this particle 180 degrees up, the particle on Venus will turn 180 degrees down. And you go, that's incredible. How's that possible? Well, because things that have interacted will forever interact. And that's really, it's just amazing. So the measurement of A doesn't just produce B, they actually influence mutual interacting. They're influencing each other. So we call this non-local action at a distance. And the philosopher Henry Stapp says not only matter is interactive, but minds are interactive. Our thoughts are entangled. It means that if you have met someone or interacted with someone and then you're split apart, that a thought that appears in your mind can appear in their mind as well. We used to call this a strange coincidence, or, you know, I mean, the example I always use is like, I used to work with this person, Pat, and, you know, Pat retired and she moved away. And one day I was thinking, I wonder how Pat is doing. And sure enough, what appeared was a phone call from Pat. How are you doing? And I said, I can't believe it. I was just thinking about you. And that's kind of the entanglement. And if we were to begin to realize the effects of entanglement, that we are affecting everything else and everything else is affecting us, that brings about a whole new awareness of what we're thinking, how we're acting. So entanglement is another way of saying that physical reality is interconnected at its deepest levels, and that there is a superposition of states that is complementary rather than contradictory. So what's important here, and why I spend a lot of time just kind of laying these physical principles out, is because unless we know what nature's about, we cannot know really what we're about. And I think sometimes we have become the most unnatural beings on the earth, humans. And so the beauty of nature is that it is interactive, interrelated, and this is from Karen Barad's work. Once a pair of particles or a divided single particle is entangled, they remain connected no matter where in the physical universe they travel. That's pretty incredible. Once entangled, forever entangled. That's pretty amazing. And so we call this relational holism, right? If reality is non-local, it means everything can affect everything else and doesn't have to be based on distance, then nature is not composed of material substances, but deeply entangled fields of energy. It's as if we were to look outside and think, oh no, that's not just a tree and a flower and a lake, but these are entangled fields of energy, all interacting with one another. And you know, this is where I do think some of the indigenous spiritualities already knew this, right? You know, for example, in the Ubuntu culture, when a tree is cut down, the tree sends its spirit to surrounding trees. That kind of entanglement, you know. And if you've read Peter Wohlheben's Intelligent Trees or Merlin Sheldrake's Entangled Life, nature is already living this way, right, in this sense of an undivided wholeness. So what we are saying is that most of nature actually works as open systems. In other words, an open system moves from, you know, it doesn't follow the second law of thermodynamics from order to disorder because it's open. So a closed system without energy input will wear down. And that's sort of like the systems we have grown up in. They've been closed systems. And the systems say, if you don't put more energy in here, like the church, if we don't get more people into this church, we're going to have to close. An open system is like, no, let's open the door and let everyone in, you know, doesn't matter what you are. And that says we can be affected and be changed by the larger environment. So a closed system proceeds in the direction of increasing disorder. An open system proceeds in the direction of new order. And if anything, you know, my one hope, maybe my one prayer, is that the Catholic Church can become an open system. Yay! Anyway, okay, enough of that. Open systems are about relationality. And, you know, the one thing about open systems is that, you know, it's not that the system doesn't have a pattern, right? You know, it follows a pattern. But it's like, you know, at any point in time, something new can emerge in that system. And you have to live in such a way that we're open to the new, you know? And we call that newness a strange basin of attraction. And so I think of Jesus, for example. I think Jesus issues in an open system of a religious spirit, right? So he's Jewish, right? And he comes in, but he has a new way about him. He's like, what's this? What's this new thing about the reign of God is near? He's like a strange attractor. And that strange attractor starts to pull the system into a new pattern. And people are like, wow, this is really interesting. This is, you know, peace and forgiveness, and God is doing new things, this new pattern here. And over time, that new pattern begins to amplify. It repeats itself and amplifies. And if you give it enough time, you have new things emerging. So open systems, disorder, strange attractors, fractals, and emergence. Do you have that all together? Okay, good. And that's how nature works. That's how we're here after 13.8 billion years of cosmic life, 4.2 billion years of Earth life. We're here because nature is open, spontaneous, playful, relational, energetic. So David Bohm kind of one of my heroes, says, as human beings in societies, we seem separate. This separateness that we have built societies and cultures on, this is artificial. This is artificial intelligence, quite honestly. In our roots, we are part of an indivisible whole, and we share in the same cosmic process. We are part of an every single person, every religion, ethnicity, race, culture, wherever you find yourself on the planet, we belong to a cosmic wholeness. The earth, Thomas Berry reminded us so clearly, the earth is our mother, right? The earth is primary. We emerge from this earthly process. We are not here as masters of the process. So we are in a huge paradigm shift, and it's not going all that well, I have to tell you. Because Newton's world, this closed system, hierarchical, top-down kind of system, is about order. And order means power. So top-down systems are systems of power. And the basic line is, who has the power, right? Relational systems, bottom-up systems, relational systems is a different way of powered. They're shared powered, right? If you're relational, power doesn't belong to any one entity precisely because you're entangled, right? You can't have power in one thing over another. So Newton's world is hierarchy, control, goals, individual, mechanistic, right? It works to get a degree, to get a job, to do what, you as an individual want to do. It doesn't work for the whole. The post-Einsteinian world is open, bottoms up, complexity. That's a world I didn't talk too much about, but I'll get back to it. Holarchy, the principle of the whole, not hierarchy. The principle of the sacred, but that meant, let's start with the Pope and work our way down. He's a nice guy, though. I like him. Post-Einsteinian possibilities, interconnectivity. So we're in a huge shift, but our systems don't want to shift. Our major systems, our political systems, our economic systems, and then our educational systems are sort of like, yeah, we probably have to shift. We don't really want to shift politically or economically, especially economically. Because, the top-down systems are about wealth accumulation. Power and wealth go together. And the fact is, no one wants to give up that, and we do not have a sufficient awareness of belonging to the same cosmic whole to want to abandon those positions of power. And you gotta kind of name the reality that we're in, right? And it's about power, money, and position. And the thing is, what we want to move toward, to go back to nature, because I think our whole, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be the earth. I want to be part of the whole. I want to return to my own natural roots. That's going to be a whole new way of living, right? A whole new awareness of things. So it's about consciousness, about where your mind is. And the one thing I think, one of the major discoveries of 20th century physics was the relationship of the mind and matter. Mind and matter. I was talking to a philosopher the other day, a really super guy, really smart and very well known, Jack Caputo. And he still has ideas that the mind is separate from matter. And I was like, wow, that's really not what quantum physics is telling us, Bertrand Russell, who was a British philosopher, says, we know nothing about the intrinsic quality of physical events, except when these are mental events that we directly experience. We can't say what the intrinsic quality of this wooden or plastic desk or whatever it is here is, except experiencing it. He says, in having conscious experience, we learn something about the intrinsic nature of physical stuff. And here's the key, for conscious experience is itself a form of physical stuff. And that's like, huh? What does that mean, What does that mean? Max Planck says, I regard consciousness as fundamental. And I regard matter, here's the key, matter as derivative from consciousness. We cannot get behind consciousness. Everything we talk about, everything we regard that exists begins with consciousness. we have learned how to talk about everything apart from apart from the mind. So we talk about people and things and world, and we have no idea that everything that exists, everything that I'm talking about, begins with my awareness of what I'm talking about. So consciousness so what we're saying here is that not just me, but matter itself, this is what scientists are saying, matter has a wave-particle duality, and therefore every aspect of matter has a mindfulness to it and a material quality. And you're like, what does that mean? How can a quark have a mind? Because we think of mind having this. But mind here really just refers to the way, we might say, waves overlap, the way that there's an informational exchange. We don't know what consciousness is, so don't feel like I'm giving you anything like, we don't know, but we do know that without it, we just wouldn't exist. No consciousness, nothing else, right? No mind, no matter. Everything that we're talking about begins with mind. Everything, even God, even religion. So everything, the way we construct our world, the way we approach nature, everything that we have to say about nature begins with consciousness. Nature itself has a level of consciousness within it because matter is not just stuff. Matter is energy, and energy has a level of relationality, and relationality is the flow of information, and the flow of information has some type of awareness to it. And so whoever thought, like the trees out there are going, what are they talking about in there anyway, so. Like they're talking to one another, right? They're aware of us. Whoever thinks like that? Like the water out there, the sea pond, the leaves, the sky, they're all like, yeah, these humans are gathered in there, and it's pretty artificial in that our environment that they're in, but, In the beginning was consciousness, we can say. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was conscious, and the Word was life. Consciousness may be the very basis of life itself. God, for the Hindus, God is consciousness. The whole spiritual journey is to the purity of consciousness. And attaining that is Atman, right? Brahman, right? To attain that purity of mind. And so we call this relationship between mind and matter panpsychism. That consciousness is a fundamental quality of cosmic life. Consciousness precedes matter. In fact, everything has consciousness. The mental occurs down to the lowest level of the physical. Everything has a level of mindfulness and materiality. That's our reality. Everything has a level of mindfulness and materiality, which led then Teilhard de Chardin to say, that, he said, there can be no single or coherent explanation of the totality of the cosmos if the human consciousness is considered an erratic object in a disjointed world. Do I need a new one?
Your batteries are dead.
My batteries are dead? Really? That does not sound good at all. The whole must include mind and matter. It's not just about matter. It's mind and matter must be brought together into a unified wholeness. And this is what Teilhard said. We are part of nature. Nature has an awareness built into its own deep relationality. And we're kind of messing it up, just in case you haven't figured that out. We call this, so why am I telling you all this on a Saturday morning? Because we're in a huge paradigm shift. Huge. Philosophically, it's a huge paradigm shift. And this is where I think our classical theological positions, if they don't shift, they will become just completely irrelevant. It's a turn to matter. A turn to realize that matter is really not matter without mind. In fact, matter is sort of the mirror of mind, and mind is the expression of matter. I know it might take a while to chew on that one for a while, but try getting rid of your mind to talk about matter. Not possible. So matter itself is about relationships, right? And it's not about agency, but it's the capacity to affect and be affected. So it's not about being human agent. It's the capacity to be human effectors and affectors. It's not structure. Matter is constantly assembling and reassembling. I think nature has its own kind of built-in awareness of things. Darwin called this survival of the fittest or adaptation. But, do you ever watch a little ant colony or bees, and they kind of just know, like, okay, kids, we gotta, the queen is asking us to get ourselves together here and build a little trap because, the other colonies are coming in, so we better, build, store our food. They kind of know what to do. Or birds flying. I mean, the electromagnetic fields of birds is pretty amazing. Like, how do they know where Florida is, Like, okay, we're all getting on, but it's not like, Air Canada. I mean, they're all, flying in the same direction. So there are fields of awareness built throughout nature, which means that nature is a way that there's something here about nature I think we need to attend to. It's constantly assembling and reassembling. It's constantly undergoing kind of chaotic overturns, and then new things emerge. Matter is always, in a sense, becoming more mindful. Nature is very open. It's very playful. It just is. It's okay. It's willing to do new things. So matter has an excess to it. It's not just mere stuff. Right? I think that's something, again, I think the indigenous spiritualities understood this so well. Right? They called it spirit in nature, or animism. There's an aliveness here, right? It's an aliveness. We can't just cut down trees and siphon off lakes and do whatever we want to build a condominium association or to build a new shopping mall, because there's an aliveness here. So we've been, every time we're doing that, we're stripping life, from this, we're stripping the vitality of life from matter itself. So we can consider anew the location and nature of the capacities for agency. Agency is not just human agency. Everything has agency in a world of the new materialisms. The floor has agency, this desk has agency, and you're like, that's not possible. That's just a podium. That's just plastic. That doesn't have agency, but it does. And the more we say that's just plastic, this is just a microphone, this is mere, I can just destroy this thing, because I'm a human, I have power, I can do these things, right? We don't realize what does it mean to live in an interconnected whole of deep materiality, right? Where mindfulness is built right into matter itself. And we got to get our heads around that one. So what we are saying is that what accounts for the human mind is active in the universe. What accounts for us being here has already been alive and flourishing within the universe. Now, my hero or guide to the universe has been Teilhard de Chardin. He's a Jesuit scientist who born in 1881 and died in 1955, was a paleontologist by training. Spent most of his career in the deserts of China, digging up old bones. As a Jesuit priest, he had a deep commitment to the incarnation, especially to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. But he felt that there was something going on here in evolution that could, escape the human eye. Now, Teilhard thought in terms of patterns. That's how I look at him. He was like a patternist. And he saw that there's an incredible wholeness in nature. Even if you go down to the smallest level of things, there's a wholeness. And he said there's something here that keeps kind of moving this whole towards ever greater wholeness. And this should be our first ray of hope, that we're here after immense periods of time where there's been vast destruction. I mean, vast. We've had at least 5 major cataclysmic events on this earth, the kind with the brontosaurus and the dinosaurs and all, kind of roamed the earth, even though we still have their DNA, by the way. And we're here. So there's something going on here that misses the human eye. And that's what Teilhard is calling our attention to. First of all, he says there's an energy here, because he was very attentive, actually, to what the new physics was saying to us. He says there's a new energy that has an irresistible kind of quality to it. It's an energy that is, at once, it's radial. There's a withinness to matter. Every aspect of matter has this inside or this radial energy, and every aspect of matter has this sense of withoutness or attraction. Give it enough time, matter attracts and it transcends. Give it enough time, things come together and new things happen. And that's what's been happening forever. I mean, the whole time since this earth began. So he said, well, what best describes an energy of attraction and transcendence? And he called it love energy. Love. Not love just as a human emotion, but love as the core energy of the universe. An irresistible energy that will continue to attract and transcend despite the forces of entropy, despite the forces, any forces that seek to wear things down. Love is building up. It builds up as consciousness builds up in the universe. Now, is that not an amazing thing? Love as a cosmological force. Love that's unitive, creative, and transcendent. Love transcends because love unites, as the medievalists would say. So he spoke of physical reality as having attractability, unitive nature, and emergence. Emergence is a really good word. Emergence is the term that says in nature, new things happen, right? Things like hydrogen and oxygen, those two little elements, they come together, right? And something new is formed. It's called water, right? And water is neither hydrogen nor oxygen. Water is distinct from them, and yet without them could not be water. Isn't that amazing? Like life comes together, new things happen in such a way that it's irreducible to the elements. And that's what Teilhard sees as the force that's underlying everything going on here in this story of life. So he says, love is the most universal, the most tremendous, and the most mysterious of the cosmic forces. So love as a cosmic force. That's what he's telling us here. Love as a cosmic force, not just a human emotion or a cultural sentiment, but the deepest reality of our cosmic reality, our cosmic life. And therefore, if love is our cosmic reality, our deepest energy, is what Teilhard is saying, then he says, it is not just little, entities, all individual. Love is unitive, and therefore, if love is our core reality, where are we before we are an I? And that's very consonant with what we know from relational holism, what we know from energy itself. It's a we before there's an I, and in fact, there's no I without the we, right? So again, that's number 2 of our artificial existence. We have separated the I from the we. Right? I am who I am, and you are who you are. And if we want to be an I and a you, we'll have to make that decision. It's like, really? Like, come on. Cosmic life in Teilhard is intrinsically communal. Intrinsically communal. So, again, if we want to talk about not just talk about nature, but if we want to be nature, this is, in a sense, we have to, get back to a kind of understanding of our deepest roots. So he's saying that the universe is thoroughly relational and in the framework of love, and says that the physical structure of the universe is love. The universe. Question is, does the universe need us? Are we obstacles to what the universe is about? And you're like, oh my gosh, how could anyone ever ask that? Well, I'm asking you that because we haven't done too well, on this planet. Does the future need us? That's going to be a question that artificial intelligence is going to ask. So we are in this process. I'll do a little bit more and we'll take a break. We live in a process not of, God did not just say, ta-da, here you are. Here's your garden. Take it away, kids. We live in an evolutionary world. And that word is still difficult for a lot of people. Like, to think, what does it mean to live in evolution or as evolution? We're not just in evolution, we are evolution. We are the whole universe on the level of thought. Like, there's no universe out there, like you belong to the universe, like there's a thing called the universe. We are that universe. It's us. And the way we think about that universe shapes its future, shapes all of cosmic life. Now, evolution just simply means, it means that life is not static, fixed, or mechanistic. Life is dynamic, right? It's very dynamic. Again, changing, process. Process is a good word. More and more, I finally realized Teilhard is a process thinker. I am a process thinker. I'd like to see the whole church become process-oriented because process is about deep relationality. And basically, we're saying nature is playful, it's spontaneous, it's creative, it will do new things. It dies out, but not forever. New things are born. Some things die, other things are born. So Teilhard says, evolution is much more than just nature. It's a general condition to which all theories, all hypotheses, all systems must bow, and which they must satisfy if they are to be thinkable and true. This is where, today, we're at a crossroads. We do not have systems that think in terms of evolution. We have systems that still think in terms of vertical hierarchy. But if we were to see ourselves in this story of life, and to picture this life of evolution in terms of, say, an encyclopedia of 30 volumes. Your 30-volume encyclopedia of life. Each volume has 450 pages, and each page is 1 million years, all right? So volume 1 is the Big Bang. Now, the Earth does not come about until 20 volumes more. Volume 21. So what's happening for the first 20 volumes, right? A lot of stuff. Just not us. Volume 21, Earth. That means the asteroid collisions, and little sulfur ponds, etc. Life, volume 22. Volume 29, the Cambrian period. Now, volume 30, page 385, the dinosaurs go extinct. We're in volume 30, by the way. Volume 30, page 390, the mammals appear. Like, those are your elephants and whales, Volume 30, page 450, the last line, the last 2 words of the last line. Human beings. That's us. Now, here's the thing. This is not the end of the book. There's no period. There's no conclusion, thank you for reading this book, we're at the end of our story. We humans are in evolution, which means we have not always been this way, and we will not always be this way. We will become something new. And we have to get our heads around that. It's one of our greatest, what? Are you kidding? We're not it? Nope. Sorry. So one thing we know about evolution, it's incomplete. Telling the story as a story in terms of, an encyclopedia means this story is still being told. And we're the ones to, in a sense, now write the next chapter. There are no fixed essences. We cannot say
what exactly anything is, because given circumstances and, the way energy works, things change. So I do not use the word essence very much anymore. I think the word is old, and it gives us the wrong idea that this is exactly what something is, when in fact, nothing is exactly what it is. Nature is consistently oriented toward new and complex life. It's not so much, oh, look at us, we're dying. Oh no, what are we going to do? Like survival mode. The fact is, there's a lot happening, right, underneath us, and nature's saying, look, get up, wake up and move forward. There's something new happening here. And our challenge is to say, what is that new? So nature works along the lines of creativity and transcendence. Give it enough time, the right conditions, new things happen. That's how we're here. And so, not just to, just some points here, the last two. Time does not go backwards. We will never go back to what was, because there is no what was. The what was is. The way time works is that it's constantly, in a sense, a function of space. It's the function of the way matter is moving. Time, we might say, is the movement of matter. That's what time is. And we're constantly moving. So we have things like memories, but we usually locate time as like it was an absolute thing that took place absolutely back then, when the back then is actually our relationship to events that occurred in our life. So, this is probably my time to get a little cough drop of some sort. The three prongs of evolution. Novelty, creativity, future. We, excuse me. It's air quality. Closed system. Oh, that's so nice. Inevitably, God sends cough drop my way. Thank you. I think sometimes we think too much in a survivalist mode. How are we going to survive? It seems to be, it all seems to be breaking down, and we're not going to make it. And we're constantly feeling, you get that sense in the culture. There's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of stress in this culture. There's a feeling of hopelessness. There's a feeling like, I can't do it anymore. I don't know where to go. And the thing is, nature is telling us over and over and over, new things happen. Creativity. Life is about the future. It is always about the future. It has always been about the future. Teilhard recognized that, and he said the whole universe rests on the future as its sole support. The future is beckoning us, it's calling us and drawing us onward. So evolution is not just background to our story, it is our story. And we've got to get our heads around it. And that means living in a whole new way. Change your seats, get up, do crazy things, right? Do the unthinkable. Because nature is kind of like, woo, leaves fall, things die, new things are born, and live in the playfulness of open systems, right? The playfulness of just local boundaries. Because something's happening here. That's what Teilhard recognized. Something is happening. Something's taking place. But we're so focused on surviving and, and wanting to keep things as they are, or, return to nature when we are nature, which means returning to ourselves. We're missing the fact that something is taking place through us. Teilhard asked the question, is evolution random or directed? Is nature going someplace? Scientists don't like this question because they will say evolution's just a way of describing and understanding the mechanisms of how nature changes. So they say, we can't say if it has direction. But David Sloan Wilson, a biologist, recently has converted to Teilhard, and he said he's onto something there. Something's happening. And if you stick with this story, I hope you're going to see get a clue of where this might be going. It's really quite exciting. But here's what Teilhard said. There's a fundamental law in nature for Teilhard. It's called the law of complexity consciousness. The law of complexity consciousness. Given enough time, consciousness, and it's because we're tool makers, basically. We've always been tool makers. Nature is tool making. It's not just humans. Ants are tool makers, beavers are tool makers, little cells are tool makers too. Like, we find the ways to optimize life. And so as we build things, these things change us. We create the tools and the tools create us, so to speak. And as we are created, we begin to see new possibilities. We begin to relate to new ways. And as we relate in new ways, consciousness rises. So these things start to work together, complexity and consciousness. So basically, Teilhard says, evolution is the rise of consciousness. Evolution is the rise of consciousness. Where your mind is, there the rest of the cosmos lies. Where your mind is, there your treasure lies. And that is the story of where we are. Our fastest evolver today is technology. And the thing is, because we grew up in a world that was dominated by a medieval cosmology for religion, a Newtonian hierarchy for all our social structures, we have not really paid attention to technology. But I remember back in the late 70s and 80s when the first cell phone was being produced. I was in New Jersey, where I grew up with a phone on the wall. It had like a 3-foot cord, so, everyone heard your conversation too. And they said, they're going to build a cell phone, like a phone that you could carry in your hands. I said, you're kidding. That's ridiculous. Well, soon enough, there was the phone. It was like this big, and then you could carry it around your hand. And then, like, in the late 80s, they were saying, they're going to put a computer in a phone. I said, what's a computer? And sure enough, by late 90s, we started putting phones and computers together, and that was the threshold that has changed us. Google, Microsoft, these are companies all that began only within the latter half of the 90s and the early 20th century. This is relatively new. Technology is an exponential evolver. It's evolving us exponentially at a law of breathless rate. And because we treated it something like, oh, I guess I'll get a new phone, but we find ourselves more and more not only just addicted to it, we need it to sustain our lives now. Without it, we can't function. And so this technology has now woven its way into the human matrix. And it's beginning to really alter what we are. Remember, we're not a fixed species. We're a local species. We're something that's here, but we have not permanent boundaries. We have local boundaries. So cyborg is the term that was used in the early 1960s when we began to send men into space, right? And we had to strap them to oxygen tanks and things that would help their muscles function, and so they could stay, humanly alive in conditions of outer space. So a cyborg is a human who has certain physiological processes aided or controlled by mechanical or electrical devices. It means that boundaries have meaning only for the local, the embodied, from where you are, but boundaries can change. Boundaries can be they can be hybridized. You can attach things. So everything like your hearing aids, your pacemakers, your knee implants, everything like that renders you a cyborg. So you are no longer a pure member of the Homo sapien species. You are now a member of the Homo sapien cyborg species. I hope you can deal with that and will not have an existential crisis of some sort. So I'll just do one more slide and then we'll end and take a break. What we are beginning, and this has been hard for us to get our heads around, what we're beginning to realize is that what technology has awakened us to is that the human does not possess a stable form. But we should have known this from just observing nature itself. But the fact is, we fell into an awareness of stability, that we have always been this way, and that we will always be this way. And cyborg life says, nope, that is not true. So the cyborg means the end of a certain understanding of the human as an autonomous individual self, distinguished from the rest of nature by a rational will. Even if we see language like, we humans are part of nature, or we're stewards of nature, that really underscores a certain distinctiveness of the human. We're rational creatures, right? We are something that's distinguished from everything else. And the fact is that independent, rational self is the modern liberal subject that's basically at the root of our modern liberal problems of opposition and the many, many conflicts we find ourselves in today. So what the cyborg is about is that what counts as human is not and should not be self-evident. The human actually is being redefined today as a constellation of physical, cultural, spiritual forces constantly in formation. We are more like eddies in a stream than like fixed blocks. We're constantly being formed by our relationships as we are forming relationships. So even the question of soul or what makes us distinct, even that, those are outflows of core constitutive relationality, which means that all that we're about can change. And the question is, what do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want to be? Change is the operative name. Quite honestly, the New Testament is really all about change, right? We call it conversion. Before I begin, do you have any outstanding questions or any thoughts that, you'd like to share, some clarities that we need to straighten out before you go on? Or you're good to go? Anything in particular? Yes? Here.
I was just thinking of the slide with the divide between religion and science, and then the slides at the end that reminded me of my formation with Star Trek when I was young, cyber, and I learned a lot from Star Trek. Anyway, I was, reading about people who studied giraffes and other animals and how many have gender fluidity and same-sex attraction members of many species, and how hard we are, and I have been in the past, on judging and moralizing about the human species, and why we aren't facing this as church to just generally apply science.
Yes. Yeah, thank you. That is very true. Again, I think, the church still holds philosophically to a lot of Aristotelian ideas on matter and form. And so you'll see things like intrinsic evil or, essential or substantial, distinctions. These terms have been modified, if not just outright changed, by modern science. Our whole understanding of matter has radically shifted. So cyborg just telling us that nature is fluid, nature is plastic, and so I think having polymorphism and kind of gender fluidity in the natural world is not like a shocking idea. Nature has been, kind of working with this forever, for eons. On the human level, we have reduced everything to this biblical notion that God made them male and female. And that's it.
you know, and we know exactly what a male is and exactly what a female is. And of course, today, that kind of essentialist kind of language is shifting to the fact that we are as we perform what we are, you know, that what we are is a constant ongoing engagement of our identity with the world, you know, with our environment. So the idea that gender identity is fixed is just an old idea, right? So ontologies. So one thing, and this kind of just helps us go into the next phase here, is one thing that artificial intelligence has done for us is created what some are calling ontological shock. Ontological, isn't that a great term? Ontological shock. Our ideas on what we think is right or true or exists are disrupted, radically disrupted. So for like having a robot, for example, you know, as a companion, or, you know, I mean, and the fact is, I like my Alexa, quite honestly. I rely on her. I'm like, Alexa, how you doing? Hello, Ilia, are you having a good day? Yes. So one thing that the new sciences and artificial intelligence is really inviting us to is to reconsider what it means to be a bounded person. Those boundaries are not fixed, and to understand the permeability of what we are. The fact that when we're talking about identity or personhood, we're trying to move towards, and this even goes for AI to some extent, how can we better or optimize what we are? And not be confined to, you know, live out of this binary existence. We just don't live in binaries. We live, the logic of nature is much more complex. It's triadic. It works in flow, patterns of flow, rather than this or that. It's black or white. It's, you know, gay or straight, or this or, you know, it just doesn't, it just doesn't, you know, so. And therefore, there's two movements today, two primary movements. I mean, again, these are just broad categories to say that artificial intelligence is moving us, and it's moving us very fast. I'm sure you're familiar now with ChatGPT and ChatGPT-4. And our first thing is like, oh, no, there's a computer who can write essays and write books, and your next book on Teilhard de Chardin will be by a computer. And we're shocked by it. But we created this stuff, I just want you to know. Like, so technology is like a mirror. And it's like, mirror, mirror on the wall, what do you want to be? The best of them all, you know? And so we have to say, this is not something outside us, we're producing it, right? And what do we want with it? What do we want to be with these technologies? Transhumanists are a whole group that arose in the late 90s, a movement, a philosophical and cultural movement that says we can use technology to advance what we are, to become more super intelligent. We can become super wonderful, super this, super that, overcome the death barrier, perhaps move to a more democratic politics and egalitarian political society. So transhumanism refers to the perfection of the human person by means of technology. But in some ways, it's saying that biology was never our destiny. Chips are our destiny. And so radical transhumanism says, don't worry about the biological world because we're exiting that world. And the world of silicon may become our greater reality. So it's hard for us, the radical transhumanism leads us into those scare modes, like, oh no, you know, like robots are gonna rise up and take us over and this type thing. But it's more like, we're more like post-human. Post-human are, in a sense, a reconfiguration of what we are, sort of like transcending boundaries with our devices. So generation, the Zillennials, what they call the Zillennials today, which are Gen Z with a millennial to it, they are post-humans. So they look like, you know, your kids. Well, even if you have school kids, right? You know, they look like us, but they're slightly different. You know, they're wired differently. And so young generations are born into a networked world. Like the minute that they enter the world, they're already, give a 6-month-year-old, 6-month little kid baby, an iPhone, they probably know what to do with it more than, your 60-year-old person knows what to do with it. So they're already primed for technology, which means that they're already thinking, already from the first moment that their brains start to develop, they're being developed in a way that is consonant with an artificially intelligent, networked type of milieu. So the post-human refers to the way the human is being configured in relation to the culture and the environment as a hybrid. So even if you say to like an undergraduate, give me your phone, and they would go into a panic mode, because their phone is part of them. It's like saying, give me your arm, or give me your head. And they get all nervous and have like a meltdown because we call it the exoskeletal self. The phone it's an extension of themselves into a device. And that's what we mean by post-human hybridization, that we're not being replaced by electronics, but we're being refashioned by them. We're becoming something different. So the post-human has a hive mind, that you don't think apart from, social media is a good example. Like you go onto social media, like older generations. So just so you know, like most of us here are analogs, right? Younger generations are digitals. So we're just talking, just slight differences in existence. Analogs use Facebook like for checking up on, their friends and their family and what's happening. Digitals use it in terms of identity formation. That they're TikTok and Snapchat and Instagram and all this kind of stuff, and it's this constant, in the interface of things like who am I, who do I belong to, what's my community, and an ongoing identity formation through these things. So it's transhumanism, however, that both of these they're not so distinct. It's how we differentiate the use of technology and the way it's changing us. And it will change us, just so you know. We are a species in evolution. We are on the cusp of, if not already, we have maybe crossed the threshold to techno-sapien life. And so we're exiting out of Homo sapiens sapiens into techno-sapien life. And that means that even these devices, all this stuff, in 10, 20 years, this is going to be obsolete. We will have implantable chips. We will be accessing information in a much more, in the clouds, in ways that we can't even think about. And that's the thing. What I find so amazing about technology is the incredible capacity to imagine what does not exist and then to create it and bring it into existence. That is what it means to be a human. That's the distinctiveness of being a human person. And in a sense, it is what distinguishes us from the wider world of nature. Plants and trees are, they're saints, as Merton says, looking up into the face of God, because they do no other than be a plant or a tree. But we humans, we have this very complex brain, and we have the capacity to imagine what does not yet exist. And where does that imagination come from? That's the whole thing. How do we imagine what doesn't exist and bring it into existence? The capacity to create it, and then to have those creations change us. That's how just really kind of incredible our existence is. And therefore, on one hand, one of the things that drives technology is, in their view, the failure of religion. So a lot of Western technology is really, there's a lot of scholarship to show it's grounded in the Judeo-Christian tradition. In the fact that this tradition has held out the aims of immortality, resurrection, salvation. You will be saved from death. We will become a new person, right? Putting on the new spiritual body. And they're like, well, right, religion has failed, and transhumanism now will fulfill what religion promises. Like, we have the capacity to attain the very things that Scripture holds out for us. And we're always like, oh, I can't believe that, that's like terrible. But we have to step back. We really have to step back from that and rethink what's going on in technology and really rethink what we're about, especially from this Christian narrative that we're engaged in. Now, one of the things, we were just talking actually at the break, death is becoming more and more optional. Do you really want to die? I mean, you may not have to. So the idea of digital immortality or brain downloading is one thing. I don't have that here, but there's a lot of effort now to move into that respect. I taught a course this past semester on the human phenomenon, and we spent the last half on questions of transhumanism and posthumanism. So I had Martine Rothblatt, who wrote the book, The Promise and Peril of Digital Immortality, Virtually Human. And she's one of the founders. Well, Martine Rothblatt is the founder of Sirius Satellite Radio. So all of this to say is, when she says that this will happen, you can rest assured that it's probably going to happen. So she has been working on models of brain downloading, of digital immortality. So she has a whole new language of mind files. We'll have mind files, like, you'll have downloaded your mind, like in information packets. We'll probably have them on cards, like you have your ATM card, you'll have your mind file card. You might have even mind file machines. And you can say, God, I'm really feeling, rather depressed and lonely. So you just put your machine in the card and you say, just up the dopamine and, just, so you could come out, just replant it, put the card in, good to go. No, I'm only teasing in some respects, but she has this idea of mind files, like we'll have files. So what she's saying is, like, what we are will be replicated in a digitized way that even, say, our bodies, succumb to space-time, and they die, what we are will live on, and they can live on in the new bodies. Like, it could be robotic bodies, it can be, anything you imagine, any kind of embodied form. And that just seems binary, it seems dualistic, and yet she's asking us to rethink what we mean by body, what we mean by matter, what we mean by mind, and how mind and body are very, very much more plastic than we ever thought. Much more in a way that they're just patterns of information that can be repackaged, reformed, and live on a new way. All of this to say our death anxiety may be severely reduced by technology. And we're like, I might be, going 6 feet under tomorrow, but I'll be resurrecting on the next day. So so the term, being a post-human electronically embedded person, which means that subjectivity is changing. Like, what we are as the word person means to be a relational being. That's really what it means. It means to have one who's sounding through, like the sounding through of our lives. And that's why I like the word person rather than individual. We're not just self-contained little atoms. We are sounding throughs, right? And we're in this kind of process where what we are, is sounding through. Like, for example, we all have a huge digital footprint. Like, and we say no one knows about me. I'm like, yeah, the whole world knows about you, actually. Your digital footprint is all over the place, and all, like, Amazon and everyone else knows it because they keep sending you these algorithms on, you like these shoes? Great. Here's 40 other pairs like this. So what we are is being distributed, through our devices and through the way we continuously develop our own algorithms, where that's what our digital footprint is. There's certain algorithms that typify our likes, our dislikes, where we stand on things. So it means that we're no longer in this world of mastery and control. We're more like integrated into this world of information, like ongoing patterns of information. And, our problem right now is that we don't know where we're going with artificial intelligence. And it scares us. I can't tell you how many people are like, oh, I'm so worried, that it's going to take us over. And we're going to, well, it will. It will, because, we're like worried about it. When in fact, the question is, how did it just rise up so fast and now it's leading everything? Well, several things. One, technology is very much tied in with our capitalistic, our economic system, and then consumerism. And these three things are huge, right? Huge corporations making huge amount of money by developing these novel ideas. But the second is, no one ever asked the theologians or philosophers, what do you think about this? Do you think this is a good idea? So, we have allowed technology just to lead us, to take the reins of control of our lives. And we've done it because we have religious principles that put us in yesterday. Right? We're still worried about getting women into the church, and in the meantime, technology is taking us into hybridized post-human life. We're like, gosh, there's no women deacons yet, or they're still using male language. This is where our attention has been, right? And so it's like, we have to not just let go of that stuff, we have to get creative, like the engineers, right? And so, we have to not resist technology, we have to creatively shape it. It's not going away, it's speeding up, right? So the one thing we have to get our heads around is like, I'm just gonna stay with nature and I'm not gonna worry about technology. And I'm like, no, please worry about technology because it will affect nature. Where our minds are, there the rest of us lies, right? So technology is neither bad nor good. So it's the values we put into technology, and that's what we get out of technology, right? It has no inherent value. And so this is our dilemma, is that we have naively started using technology and not been able to integrate it thoughtfully into what's driving this thing. How can we shape technology? If we become post-human or we become techno-sapient, how can we shape it towards our desired ends? What's our desired end? That's our question. That's where religion and science can come together, a religion and technology. So that's led, Teilhard de Chardin is one who really recognized that religion is not just something that, it's like this God from above has bestowed graciously this grace upon us, and we're religious people. Religion's more like the depth dimension of matter itself. Cells are religious, like leptons might be even religious. Like there's a driving power. St. Paul kind of got to this in his letter to the Romans, where he says the Spirit is crying out, the Spirit is groaning, all creation is crying out, because there's something in nature that's pushing it, right? We didn't stay at the level of the Pliocene era, or we didn't stay at the level of amoebas and bacteria. Something keeps pushing it forward, and that's the level of religion. What is it? What is this tethering of matter? What is it that keeps pushing matter, in Teilhard's language, to give a form to the free psychic energy of the world? If all matter is consciousness, there's something that's pushing it towards an ever greater form, and in his view, towards unification, something more unified. And therefore, that led Teilhard to, in a sense, create these principles, and I think they're really helpful for us to keep in mind. The universe, first of all, is still coming into being. Our whole understanding of space-time has to shift. We still think in principles of absolute space and absolute time, because you hear it all the time, like, we started here we are, and, in 10 years we're going to be, like gone or whatever. And it's like, oh, that's so sad. You were here, you went great, and then you're now dying. Okay, instead of like space-time itself is coming into being all the time. We have to think of ourselves in a whole new way. We don't just exist, we are becomings. We are human becomings. We are constantly coming into existence. So we have to shift our thinking from static beings to dynamic becomings. That what has been is now enfolded in what is, and what is opening up to new possibilities all the time. Second, to create is to unite. So creativity is the name of the game. Alfred North Whitehead spoke of creativity as the fundamental principle of the universe, including God. So God is not the creator of creativity. Creativity, he said, is the fundamental principle even of God. And that's like, huh? What? Really? You mean God's not first cause? Nope. Okay. So he says the world is coming into being and becomes ever new by a process of unification. So creativity, to unite, to bring in, and then it comes on the level of the human where you have imagination, where you have intuition, you have new higher complex processes that can reach out to the infinite possibilities. 30 says true union differentiates, right? As we were saying before, unitive being is actually the beauty of plurality. That's the whole point. Like, just look at nature. You know, it's not like the trees and the flowers and the brush will say, you're not like me. You know, the beauty of them is that they are what they are, right? And we see them together in this unified whole. So unity means differentiation. It's liberating and personalizing communion. It's precisely difference that unites. It's the complementarity of difference that unites. It's the question like, how did that person fall in love with that person? Do you ever get that one? Like, are you kidding? You know, right? Because there's something in that core energy of love, in that mystery of love, where one person complements or makes up what is lacking in another. And that's the beauty of the whole. Finally, the world rests on the future as its sole support. That really should be one of those banners, you know, that we have running across everything. The world rests on the future as its sole support. By future, we don't just mean like, oh, things will get better tomorrow, because, you know, certainly better than today. Future is the realm of infinite possibilities. It's everything that hasn't been fully yet realized. And that means it's open to everything, everything. And we have to expand our minds into what those possibilities are. You know, actually, as we look at the passive evolution in this flow, we see that there's a recurrent pattern in which something new and more complex and eventually more conscious eventually takes place. That's what Teilhard saw. He looked over this vast span of evolution, and he sees, wow, we're moving from simple little forms of life into more complex forms of life. And then here we emerge. And, you know, of course, we just didn't emerge like, ta-da, the people of Canada and the people of the US. Like, we have like about 1,000 relatives who go before us. You know, you find them at the Smithsonian, like Australopithecines and Nefelda and Neanderthals, and just like a whole slew of people, right? And then comes Homo sapiens. So we're newcomers on this recurrent pattern of life. Now, all this to say, Teilhard said, look, we're looking at this incredible story of life, biological life, cosmic life. It's dynamic, it's energy, it's creative, it's unifying, it's transcendent. Something's going on here, he says. Something is taking place. Something keeps pushing it forward. So he says, this can't be explained with the old theology of Thomas Aquinas. Thomas Aquinas, get that one? Just a little wake-up call there. You know, our old theology says God created and then it fell. You know, so we have lived with this notion of like, it's a fallen, weak, depraved nature, and, you know, we're just kind of making our way through it. Teilhard's like, that just doesn't work. This isn't a fallen, depraved nature. It's an incomplete, unfinished nature in which something is happening. Something new is taking place. So he asks, who will give evolution its own God? And of course, we say, we will. Okay, so, no, that's my answer. I will. So here we are. First of all, he says, he was very intuitive. You know, here I want to give a shout out call, by the way, to Sister Libby's new book with Kathleen Dinion on Teilhard's Book of the Hours. It's really beautiful, and I really encourage you to read it to get a copy because they really did a close reading of Teilhard and bring his writings into a beautiful, recurring theme of the Liturgy of the Hours. But he says Teilhard's he was an intuitive thinker. So he's experiencing something within himself and then within his own fieldwork. He says, there grew in me a presence, the consciousness of a deep-running ontological total current, which embraced the whole universe in which I moved. A current, a force, a something, a power. He says this presence within the cult of matter, a wholeness within the cult of life, a fullness, a plenitude within the cult of energy. So he says this is not just a cosmos, this is a cosmogenesis. This is a birthing process. Like the whole universe is Theotokos. The whole universe is giving birth to something that is more than divine. So in his view, matter, and the highest portion of matter is spirit. Spirit is not something that's added on to matter or that's something surrounding matter. Spirit is the energy portion of matter open to more being. And that's really what Teilhard saw, is that this is a spirit-filled, energy-filled material life. And therefore, now this is not Teilhard per se, but this is very apropos of Teilhard. He did not see Christianity as normative of all religion. And I think recently I gave a talk at Spiritual Directors International Conference, and I was talking about the Center for Christogenesis, which is the term he uses for this birthing process of what he sees as the Christic, in his view, is not just Jesus of Nazareth. It's the divinely filled materiality of everything moving towards the fullness of life, or what we call the cosmic Christ. So in his view, Christianity is not normative of religion, but normative of evolution. It is the only religion that says God, this word God, and what this word means for us. And that's a really interesting question in itself. God is fully immersed in materiality. That's what Christianity is saying. God is fully immersed in matter. And we call that incarnation, right? The birth of Jesus. And so he says, in Christianity, we have this notion that matter is open to and united with divinity in a unified way. And therefore, he says, Christianity fulfills an essential function in evolution. And, trying to understand what that means, like this whole evolutionary process is moving to something that is more spiritual, more conscious, open ever more to the plenitude of life, which is God. And therefore, he speaks of this power in evolution that he calls Omega, right? God Omega. Now, Scripture tells us, the language from Revelation, from Isaiah, I am the Alpha and the Omega. I am the beginning and the end. And I think he uses that language to signify that potential for the fullness of life, that wholeness that we yearn for, is already present from the beginning. It's already there in the smallest particles of matter. But it's not fully brought into that full actualization. And here, I think, as Teilhard would kind of put out to us, put it this way, God is love, right? So love is not something that God does, it's not like God's like this big being who, loves. Love is what God is. So if we want to talk about what is the nature of God, or what is the essence of God, St. John tells us God is love. That's what God's existence is. And therefore, love is relational, right? You can't love all by yourself, all cut off from everything else. And you can't. Love is just an idea in that respect. Love must be embodied. Love must be, in a sense, it must be expressed in another. The very nature of love is to give itself away to another. So that's another way of saying that God is love, and therefore God is not God unless God is with us and in us, right? There's no God apart from all that we know about God from this material world. Are you with me so far? So there's no God up there, and because sometimes we talk about God like God is up there, but then like God had this meeting among the little Trinity there, and then God decided to send the Son because, this was a fallen world, and so they had, took a vote. The Son came, he's redeemed it all, and God is what? And what do we expect? What are we hoping for? What do we think heaven is, by the way? Because we've developed thought patterns that are too static and closed and boxed in. It's like, when I die, I used to have a sister in community. She said, I'm going to suffer here because, when I die, I'll live forever with God. I'm like, sister, really? That's kooky. I'm like, heaven is not like, an eternal sleeping. You're just not going to like hang around with God forever and ever and ever. I mean, that just makes no sense whatsoever. Like we're here for 80 or 90 years and then we're going to have an eternal sleeping with God, or like eternal Sundays with God. I don't know. That means Sunday with ice cream. So there's something going on here, right? In God Omega. It's this power of love, right? The core energy of the universe is love, Teilhard says. He's saying that from a physical perspective. Now we're saying this from a spiritual perspective, that there's a core energy that it will not die. It resists entropy. It will not wear out. It continues on, which is very consonant with Scripture, right? First, God, the name God from Scripture, is one who is, I am there, who will be there for you, as we hear, in Exodus. Second, that God is relational, that God is in deep relational with us. The whole Old Testament's like, I can't believe you did this again, and like, oh, Yve, you did this, I'm coming after you, right? Where are you anyway? So God is constantly seeking us out, meaning that God is an irresistible, unconditional power of love, a God who will not go away, even if we try to run away. And so a God who keeps pushing through all our limits, right? A God who keeps, who's in a sense not only pushing through, but puts before us the possibilities for something ever more. God is always the name of the infinite possibilities of all of life. The fullness of life is always with us, the potential for that life. But what God is about is to become actualized in love. That's what it means to live a godly life, to bring that love, in a sense, that love that brings peace and wholeness and forgiveness and kindness and a sense of belonging into enfleshment, right? Then God begins to live. And that's what we call the Christ, right? And so Teilhard begins to realize, look, this whole universe has meaning. It has a purpose. It's not just here as some blind, random cosmic event. We're not just hurtling into some unknown future. That we are here with a vision, right? And God's vision is from the very beginning, right? The fullness of love in a personal union of love. So, from the letter to the Colossians and the letter to the Ephesians, we begin to realize that Christ is first in God's intention to love, in God's intention to create. That whether or not sin ever entered in here, or Adam and Eve, whoever they are, whoever came about, sin is not the reason for Christ. Love is the reason, and it has been from the beginning. Which means that this universe is oriented toward the fullness of love. And that means that creation is incarnation. These are not just two separate things, like we have creation and incarnation. It's rather all of creation is God's incarnating love. It's like the whole kit and story here of evolution is God becoming something in and through this material life. So God is not opposed to matter or independent of matter, but matter matters to God. Matter does not exist as a self-contained order, but bears with it this drive toward the spiritual, which means even if we talk about ecological devastation, that's a theological statement, right? It's not just ecology that's wearing down, it's very symptomatic of religion that has worn down. You see, you can't separate these things. And you begin to see the patterns of how the failure of religion is the failure of the planet. And until we reset the dial of religion, the planet itself cannot find its new GPS system, right, to orient itself towards life. Because God here, what we're saying is God is part of the whole, not just the creator of the whole. God is the whole of the whole. So we call this a cosmotheandrism. You cannot separate the mysteries of God, the mystery of the human person, and the mystery of matter itself. This is Raymond Panikar's great insight. These are three interlocking mysteries. You can't get rid of us, and we can't get rid, if we get rid of us, then what exists has no meaning. It has no purpose. It has no aim. We can't get rid of God. We would have no whole. We would have, we have no sense of, of a wholeness within ourselves or among ourselves. So God and the world are in this together. Not just God over the world or God as creator of the world. It is rather that God is becoming something, becoming God in and through the world. And that's a real shift for us. It's hard to get our heads around that because we still think in very static terms. That if we use language of God and language of person, in our minds, these are fixed realities. And we're trying to understand. We have to shift our thinking here that God is the name of the dynamic divine energy of love, pushing us on to something more being, more life, more relationality, more wholeness. And so God is Godding, right? Maybe that's a better word. God is Godding the world. God is just not like, there's no God. There is no God, by the way. God is the name of the depth dimension of the whole. And unfortunately, we have anthropomorphized God. We have made God a big one of us. And we want kind of that big one of us to watch over us. And that ain't going to happen. It's just not, on some level, there is the personal God. In other words, that wholeness is deeply personal. So even when God says, I love you, there is a sense that this wholeness of being in love is particular on that being in love. There's a love that is particularized in this person and in this way. But God is not just a big being. God is being itself. And that's hard for us to shift our minds around about what this name God means for us. But it's a name that points to the mystery of absolute being in love. And however you want to image God, and that's why language about God should not be so clearly defined, or that we should know exactly who God is, like we have the real God and you don't have the real God. And that's where, if you begin to look at the shift in religion in our period, it's not so much that who has the real God and who doesn't. It's rather that, does this religious path lead you to wholeness of being in love? That's the question. It's a question of wholeness rather than rightness or wrongness. So, Teilhard's theism is such that there's a God-world relationship together. Right? These are inextricable. That God is truly related to the world, and the world is truly related to God. In other words, Thomistic theology says God is really related to us because God is creator, but we are not really related to God because we're just creatures. We participate in God. And so we've had a theology where we don't make an essential difference to God. Like, it doesn't matter what we do. God's like, we have a sense like God really is immune to us. And Teilhard's theism says, nope, God is affected by us. Like, it makes a difference how we love or fail to love. It makes a difference to God. If we have a godless world, It means that all that God can be cannot come into reality because we have, in a sense, created the conditions for extinction of God. And therefore, both Teilhard and Carl Jung realized that God and humanity form an entangled whole. An entangled whole. It's as if, what if from all eternity we've been entangled with God? From all eternity, this world of material life has been, within God's life in some way. I mean, there's ways to read that even in Scripture. Dante kind of got that idea as well in his, that mystical scene at the end of his Paradiso, which means that the dynamism of God and the evolution of the cosmos cannot be separated. It's the same question. If this evolutionary process is moving, again, we're moving from simple to complex life, from, proto-conscious life to super complex conscious life. Something is moving this whole kit and caboodle from within. That's Teilhard's view. It's a power from within and yet more than us, right? Not just us, but more than us. And that's how he speaks of God. God is within and ahead. God is, in a sense, the power and yet the future. And so he says God needs humankind to become whole and complete. There is an openness of God to pleroma, to fullness. And of course, this is what the Christ is about, right? This is what the whole risen Christ is about. New life, right? A new humanity, a new heaven, a new earth. God is now fully alive in us, in all of materiality. But, yet our theology has not really, it hasn't really been described or conformed to this. And so we have, the Lord is risen, alleluia, When is Christmas again, anyway? Because we like Christmas better. So we call this theogenesis, God becoming. The earth is becoming cosmogenesis because God is becoming. And God is becoming while the earth is becoming. These are inextricable mysteries. In Teilhard, this is both Teilhard and Carl Jung, through ongoing incarnation, God is rising up through consciousness and completed by humankind in directed evolution. Now, I know this is a lot for the afternoon. I can see you're all like, oh my God, I'm having a hard time getting my head around this. So, but it's, Athanasius, back in the, 4th century, he put it this way: God became human so that we might become God. Simple. And we're like, okay, we got that, well, what does it mean to become God? What are we talking about there? Because that is where the transhumanists say, we know what it means to become God. We can become super intelligent. We can live on forever. We don't need religion because it's actually an obstacle to becoming godly. And this is our thing. Bad theology will make room for everything else. Everyone and their mother will come to the table, right? And so we have to understand, what does it mean to become God? What does that mean? What does the incarnation mean for us? That's really the underlying question here. Because to become God is to talk about incarnation. God is becoming flesh, right? God is becoming something in and through us. So in Teilhard's view, we have this relational God empowering a relational universe, and he calls this Christogenesis, right? Not just Christ. Christ is risen. We have Christ has died, Christ is risen, Christ will come again. Alleluia, alleluia, alleluia. Okay. Well, what if we had Christogenesis, theogenesis, right? Birthing, dynamic, becoming. So what Teilhard is saying is everything is in being created. As God creates, God becomes one with. That God is fully united. And therefore, everything as it goes through creation, incarnation, is being brought together, redeemed, right? So these are not 3 separate categories, like you take 3 theology classes, and then you get a degree. These are actually 3 acts of the one act of God's self-involving love. And therefore, something is taking place. And of course, we know that what is taking place we say from our faith tradition, erupted in a particular way in the man Jesus of Nazareth, right? So Jesus, just so we're clear, is coming about by way of evolution, just like we do, right? And it's hard, like, what? Wasn't he just born of Mary? Well, she too came about by way of evolution, right? So, religions, as we know them, are axial religions: Judaism, Christianity, Islam, along with Buddhism and Hinduism. These are axial religions. That means they broke through, they emerged in evolution as humans attained a different level of consciousness, a consciousness of belonging to a larger cosmos, a sense of the whole, of personhood. So we have not always been this way, right? When we talk about indigenous spiritualities, that is a form of consciousness that actually preceded axial consciousness. And we are living in a new age of consciousness that we call second axial consciousness. Now, Jesus is a first axial person with second axial consciousness. That's how I would like to call him. So he comes about, and of course, Teilhard spoke about Jesus, the Christ. In fact, he very, very, very rarely talks about Jesus, maybe like 2 lines in all his writings. He speaks a lot about the Christ, right? Because the Christ for him is divinity united and empowering materiality towards something ever more whole. So he talks about the third nature of Christ. So right there, he has moved us past our official Christology of Chalcedon, right? It's not just divinity and humanity. Now it's divinity, humanity, and cosmos. So he says Christ is related organically and not just juridically to the cosmos. Christ in his third nature is the prime mover. In other words, divinity fully immersed in materiality is moving this universe towards something more being in love. So he speaks about Christ as evolver and omega. But I do think we can see in Jesus of Nazareth what we might call a new Big Bang or a new singularity, right? Jesus is Jewish. Just in case we're not sure, he was not Catholic. He wasn't an evangelical. He was Jewish. And he, comes on the scene quietly, because that's how God works, like very quietly, and emerges, at an age where he really came to kind of a sense of himself, kind of a, what's my vocation in life, going into the desert, kind of dealing with, do I really want to do this or not, a discernment process. And then he does something like so unbelievable. Like he goes into the temple and he begins to read like a rabbi from the Torah, the prophet Isaiah. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me. He has sent me to bring glad tidings to the poor. And of course, what's the first thing we realize? Wow, this guy is out of his mind. He's a disruptor. That's like me going into the Vatican and saying, Pope Francis, I've decided I'll be the new pope, Exactly. You go like, that is crazy. You wouldn't do that, in a million years. Welcome to Jesus, right? So in Jesus, we find he's a faithful Jew, and yet he's constantly challenging the laws and the customs that keep people excluded or on the margins or not part of the community. So what we find in Jesus is this faith in a God of a power of love to liberate one, to accept one's freedom and one's responsibility to be personhood. And honestly, the more I think about it, Jesus is, in a sense, the first transhuman, right? He's about something more than human. He wants to move us on. He's like, look, he says, the reign of God is within you. And they're like, what? What is that? And, in our language, we can say you have the power for infinite capacity for the moreness of life. You have the ability to trust that a God of unconditional love is here, to trust that God and to make new decisions, to act in new ways. So he does things in a way that are disruptive. He challenges and shifts boundaries. He's a cyborg in this way, right? He's constantly crossing the boundaries. And he lived from this new level of awareness. So the key, I think, for Jesus' life is his unitive consciousness, right? He comes into that level of deep awareness. The Father and I are one. And therefore, Jesus is a whole maker. He saw that there was no separation between himself and other people. I just had a doctoral student do an exegesis on the woman at the well. And, how Jesus really not just challenges, but literally overturns, what are preconceived customs and notions. And it's symbolic of what the reign of God is about, what we have the capacity for. And this is very much actually in line with transhumanism, posthumanism. It's saying we are not bounded by what we are. We have the capacity to imagine and to do new things, to disrupt what is towards the inclusivity of the moreness of life. And so Jesus is the preeminent or the exemplary cyborg, and like people are like, oh no, Jesus is a cyborg, that's terrible. And it's like, what he's saying is like, we do not have a clearly defined, exhaustive concept of humanity, let alone divinity. And this is where, quite honestly, I think the church is a little bit behind. It wants to clearly define boundaries. It wants to clearly define who God is and what we are. And it's like, dear Pope Francis, that this has really actually changed in the first century, but that's okay. So incarnation destabilizes, and we want a church that stabilizes, right? And that's the thing. The whole New Testament is the destabilization. And I think, if you really, one of the things I've really considered and actually discussed a little bit in my new book is, I don't know if Jesus came to establish a new religion. There's no sign of that in the New Testament. It doesn't say, God has sent me to establish a new church, or a new religion. What he says is, destroy this temple, and I will rebuild it in 3 days. And the writer says he was talking about his own person. And there's something about Jesus that wants to break out of institutional religion and establish the fact that God is alive now in the human person, in all of creation. That the new kind of church is the church of the whole, right? The planet. And we keep boxing God in, and then we keep defining God, and then we keep warring against one another on whose God is the bigger God, the better God among religions, right? And so what Jesus is about is this kind of hybrid, this God-conscious creature showing us the arbitrariness and the constructive nature of what is considered the norm. Needless to say, it didn't go all that well for him, but we have to realize that when we destabilize things, we are then subject to the forces of destabilization. And therefore, suffering and death are going to be part of an evolutionary life. There is simply no way we can live in evolution as if we're going to be pain-free or suffer-free, or we're just going to have some comfortable center while everything evolves around us. It just doesn't work that way. It's about a level of consciousness and trust and faith in a power of love that says, even if you die, you will live in a new way. You will be part of something more whole, more full of life. So Jesus, in a sense, symbolizes the self, what we're about, the psychic totality of the self. And this is, Carl Jung is saying that without integration of evil, even within ourselves, because every single person has that capacity for evil. We have the capacity to do really bad things to one another and to ourselves. And yet we have to come to terms within that. And so self-realization is the process of individuation. Carl Jung reads Jesus as the first fully individuated person. And by individuation, he means that consciousness is brought into unconscious darkness in this transformative process of becoming whole. So for Jung, religion is not an institution. Religion is the natural process of biological life or individuation. And that is a really interesting turn of things. We have institutionalized religion, and we lost sight that is first and foremost a fundamental dimension of life itself. So Teilhard, says that he does not speak of Jesus as Savior, as one who died for our sins. Basically, he sees Jesus as the symbolic whole, the whole maker. And he says, we will be saved by an option that has chosen the whole. But that is what salvation's about. To be healed by God's grace. To be healed by grace is to be made whole, right? Love heals, love makes whole, love empowers us to in a sense, become more than ourselves. So death and resurrection are really part of this. And I think even as we undergo the evolutions now in our own lives, in our own age, in our own institutions, our own communities, we have to realize that death is part of the whole thing. It's not to be feared or resisted. It is to say, for everything that's dying, something new is being born. And the question is, where are we focusing our minds? Where's our attention? And we know in the early church, it was precisely the belief in the risen Christ, the belief that God is doing new things, that God has, emerged here in Jesus of Nazareth, and now Jesus lives, our humanity lives with a whole new relation to God. That empowered them to face martyrdom, to go into the Colosseums, to really say, I am a Christian, and I'm willing to stake my life on that. In our own time, we have to ask the same thing. What does it mean, to have an identity, not as a triumphalist, like I'm a Christian and I have the true religion, but I am one who's committed to the wholeness where God's love is the power of the center. And therefore, am I willing to give my life for this? How free am I to do that? That's what it means. How free am I to really have a sense of belonging to this whole, this cosmos? So what Teilhard realized is that the Christified universe unfolds in and through us. We are God's becoming. We are God's becoming. And to the extent that we can live in that emergence of divine reality in our lives. And that means, I think, it does mean living. First, we have to, this is where spirituality is really important. The Socratic notion of know thyself, right? Self-knowledge, as Bonaventure would say, is the basis for all other knowledge. And faulty self-knowledge is the basis for lack of knowledge and everything else. And then we have to, in a sense, ask, how free am I? How much am I bounded by my fears, by my anxieties? How much am I limited because of health situation? What can I do with my life now as I exist? And I think it doesn't matter. This is not age dependent or health dependent. It's about where you are living out of the fullness of what you are and contributing to the whole that is seeking to become something more than what you are in and through you. So we all have a part to play in this Christifying universe. Now, I have just a few more slides. Do you want me to keep going? Do you want a little break? You need a coffee break, or you want me to keep going? Huh? You want to stand up? Don't leave. Do not leave. Stand up and stretch maybe, get some oxygen and blood flowing there so you don't go into complete stasis. Huh? 10? How much do you want to stretch? Oh, me? Probably 10, 15. Yeah. We're good? All right. Roll around. Good. All right. Yeah, so I'm a teacher, so I read faces. So once I see faces are starting to droop, I know that it's time to stretch. All right. Okay, you want to take a seat? You don't have to, but I mean, you can stay. All right, so let's see here. Does this make sense to you, what I'm saying? I don't mean to rock anyone's boat, but I think you're a very enlightened group anyway. But, you know, what I am saying in very, very, very nice words is, if we do not have a major theological shift, we will not make it really into the future. That's, you know, and that's putting it like in more bolder terms. We can't just limp along with what we have, which is exactly what we're doing. You know, we keep limping along and thinking that, you know, all shall be well. You know, we love Julian of Norwich. But the fact is she was, you know, living in a whole different age than ours. And we do have to take note. We have opportunities that are being handed to us, but we have to find a freedom and that power of love within us, that power of God. And then we have to act out of a new center, which is what Jesus did. Right? That's the whole point of the destabilizing Jesus, the trickster. He looked like everyone else, and yet he did things that were, you know, is like, what? You know, he's like, I can't believe it. You know, I can't believe it. Constantly pushing boundaries. Boundary pushing is what post-human life is about. It's what AI is doing for us. And the fact is, our boundaries are being pushed now very quickly, and we're scared. And all I'm saying is a theological shift says, take hold of what you are and push those boundaries into something that is more God-centered, more love-centered, more holistic, more encompassing. Technology is not our enemy. It's how we're using it. What do we use it for? So that's what Teilhard recognized. We can actually take these incredible inventions of ours and then use it to harness our energy. Like, what if we built chips that have compassionate chips, love chips, unifying chips? Like, what if we actually wired ourselves for a world of holism? Like, what if we're going to become something new, why don't we wire ourselves to become the new type of Christic person? Or however you want to call that person, because I realize there are people of all different kind of spiritualities and walks of life, and this is not trying to impose any one religion on people. This is to say, how can you best find that wholeness? And then what we share together is this wholeness of life. Just a little aside, one of my newfound friends is Diana Butler Bass. I don't know if you read her book, Grounded. She is a fantastic writer, and it's about American religion. And she talks about how, she grew up as an evangelical, went to the Episcopalian Church, and now has found the whole matrix of American spirituality just shifted into the secular. So the secular is the new realm of the sacred, putting this in another way. And it's like this. She talks about going to a sports, like the baseball, team, or you have your favorite sports teams. There's something about, we have basketball at Villanova, right? And when we're together, like in that team, like you belong to something. Everyone's wearing the same Villanova clothes, right? They're all, have the same Villanova chant. Everyone is using the same language. So it's like religious ritual. And there's a power of there's something more that we all belong to. It doesn't matter your color, your language, where you came from. We're all part of this together. And when the team won the NCAA double championship, heaven opened up on earth. We knew, what the new heaven and the earth look like. And there's something about us. We know we are more together than we are alone. That's the thing. We are more together than we are alone. And when we have the same vision, the same aim, whether it's the life of the planet, the good of the whole, or the sheer goodness of life itself, when we can celebrate that together, we are fully alive. And I think that's what this life abundant has the capacity for. We have the capacity for this. Diana also tells the story, a famous story from World War I, December 14th, in the trenches, I think in Belgium, but it was like the British, and the Germans, right? There were two, do you know the story? Yeah. And so it's Christmas time. And the Germans started putting these little lighted trees on their little trenches, and The British thought they were going to get ready to attack, so they had all their artillery, all loaded up and ready, because we're like primed to kill, right? This is a really bloody war. And one of the Germans yells out, "A gift is coming." And it was destabilizing, right? And they go, "What?" And they're for sure they're going to shoot us. And the Germans filled a basket of sausage, a boot with sausages, and threw it over to the British side. And the British, they were so incredibly amazed by this, they filled another boot with all the puddings that they had and threw it over to the German side. And for one moment, these two nation states that were at bloody war with each other became friends and companions in this one space of time. And the Germans started singing Stille Nacht, Heilige Nacht, Holy Night, Silent Night. And the British started singing it in English, and they were singing it together. One moment of time of war suspended in the becoming of what we could be together in peace. We have the capacity for a new world of peace. We have it within us, but we have to do radically different things. And so, what Teilhard recognized is that mind shapes matter. And that's why I think contemplation is so much on the rise. Not only because it is because of this, it's because we've hacked the mind. And I think we find our minds scattered through all these fields of information, and we have a great desire to harness that mind, to center it, into what we are. And so contemplation, as Martin Laird and others tell us, contemplation maximizes consciousness, right? As we begin to harness those divine energies within ourselves through prayer and through that silencing and holding still, our level of awareness can begin to deepen. One of the problems of our age with technology is that not only have we hacked the mind, but now our attention, it's all over. So we're always in multiple cognitive fields. So time is all broken up, because I have 10 minutes here and 20 minutes here, like I'm on Facebook here, and they're they're messaging me here, and someone's calling me here, and so we're like this. And so our minds we're exhausted by the end of the day, and so contemplation is necessary. We need to pull back into that deepening of what we are spiritually, biologically, and cosmically. And therefore, as Beatrice Brutto, the great Teilhardian scholar, recognizes that we are vitally related to the formation of this universe. It makes a difference how we center our lives and shape our thoughts. So contemplation is the way by which our human energy expands, and our minds, our levels of mind can be maximized, can expand. When we're too tired, we just don't have the energy to widen those fields of expansion of consciousness. So as Beatrice says, the more conscious one becomes, the more one becomes person. Consciousness and personhood are connected. Each person is person to the extent that one freely lives by the life of the whole. A person, and in fact, we are persons, we are becoming persons. We are persons in formation. We seek to become ever more personal, relational, and living by the life of the whole. And this is where Teilhard said, well, technology does draw us together. Speaking of technology, there it is, right? Does it draw us together, hearts and minds? What is it doing? Do we have technology of the heart? Are we increasing compassion, or are we increasing tribes? Because it can go either way. Technology can further divide us. It can divide us economically. Those who are very wealthy will buy the latest technology, download themselves, live on forever, go live in a spaceship with SpaceX with, Elon Musk. But the question for Teilhard is, does the role of increased mind increase love? So it's not just about information. Unfortunately, we have landed in this surplus of information. The question is, are we deepening the deepest center of what we are, and that's the capacity to love, to unite, to create, to transcend, because this then becomes the rise of God. So Teilhard's faith, faith in God, faith in this power, a power. So I love the word power actually because it means the ability to persuade. It's something that's moving us, right? And therefore, faith in God is faith in the world. The world is not opposed to God. The world is where God is godding, right? God is becoming. So it's faith in God in and through the world. And therefore, Teilhard kind of recognized that we can't stay where we are. Our religions not only will die, they probably have to die. And we should be okay with that. Like, even if, say, what if the religions as we now know them will morph or mutate into something of a new religious matrix? Now, I don't know what that means. We won't lose those traditions. They will be subsumed or enfolded into the new religious consciousness. You kind of get a glimpse of this with younger generations, right? So if people say, I'm spiritual but not religious, they might be equally religious, right? So it's not just because I don't go to church, I'm not religious. Anyone who is spiritual and seeking to be tethered to a larger whole, to a community, that's a type of religion, right? It's a type of tethering. It's a ligament. And so young people will find that perhaps in sports events, in farming, in working with the poor, in whatever it is that tethers them. And so we have to shift our categories from going to church, not going to church, receiving the sacraments, not receiving the sacraments. Now, is there a value to these things? Yes, I think there's a value to ritualizing these things. I actually am still very much a traditional Catholic, quite honestly, after all this. But that's because I was raised Catholic. These things are still meaningful for me. But I also have opened up to the possibility of other forms of sacramentalizing life. And therefore, it's widening our scope of how God is active and alive in seeking to be actualized in love. So for Teilhard, he did recognize that a new vision of the universe calls for a new form of worship and a new method of action. We cannot keep repeating prayers from the 5th century and the 12th century and the 16th century and think that they will vitalize us in the 21st century. The language of the prayers, the language of the songs, every time we use that language, we are conditioning our minds to think about divine realities in this particular way. And so we've stifled ourselves. Again, all of this to say, if the world seems to be falling apart, know that we have had to play a role, a pretty big role in this falling apart. So Teilhard is saying mysticism is the necessary complement to evolution. Karl Rahner did get it right. The Christian of the future will be a mystic, one who seeks and is lured by the ineffable mystery of God, by that future fullness of life, always with us, always more than us. And therefore, mysticism is really essential. Teilhard actually had new ideas on contemplation itself, not just as a reflection on existence. For him to contemplate is to engage the mind in new realities. It is like this. I think the best contemplatives may be the scientists, because science is a very spiritual activity, believe it or not. One is lured by a question, and then you're in this lab. You don't know where things are going to go. You set up the experiment, and then you begin to try it out over and over and over. You keep persevering through it. And then one day, you just, you hit upon a discovery. And it's like you've discovered, it's just so amazing. And that amazement is what contemplation is for Teilhard. It's the passion of desiring to know in a more unified way. I remember I remember my first discovery in the lab. I was so excited. I was an electrophysiologist, so my whole day was spent monitoring neuron potentials on an oscilloscope. I'll just leave it at that. And I was studying in conditions of ALS, when the nerves become dysfunction. And one day I saw this new pattern emerge, and I thought, oh my God. And so I ran out of the lab because I needed to, it was like maybe Martha or Mary at the tomb, like, we have seen the Lord, something like that, I have seen the neuron potential, there it is. So life, the passion of life is in the discovery of the new, always to see in new ways. It's happening all around us, but we get bogged down. We kind of get clamped down and within ourselves. So Teilhard also thought he was very involved in world religions, in the discussion of world religions. We need to come together. This is not tribalism. We're still very tribal, quite honestly. I'm Jewish. I really respect all the traditions. I think they're beautiful, quite honestly. But it's just that we use them more to separate rather than unite. How do we take the richness? It's like a stained glass window. And, taking this pain and this color and this color. And you don't go, oh, you're that? You're like just a green? Oh, my God, we're red, bright red. But you put these together and you have this beautiful wholeness, right? And so convergence of world religions, and therefore developing last a zest for life, a taste of life, an energy for life. We kind of are energy depleted. You're probably energy depleted by now, but, it's like, oh, gosh, this is so much, And because we feel the need to constantly take it in, we have to understand it all. We're not sure about things, and it's exhausting. Like life is, it's tiring, right? And, I just want to go to bed or just watch television for the next week. And yet what we're called to, I think of like nature itself. Nature has a zest for life. The flowers, they sort of burst open, trees are flowing with the wind and the waves on the water. They're kind of just moving. And that's what, like this life has a dynamism, it has an energy to it, a dynamism running through it. And the question is it running through us? It's a problem when we live exoskeletal life like this, right? Separated. Today, because we have not harnessed together artificial intelligence and religion. It's technology without aim. So we have the rise of loneliness. We have the rise of anxiety disorders. We have the rise of attention deficit disorders because we're looking for something and we're not finding it like within the whole. And we're hoping that cyberspace will be that wholeness for us. So my definition of the Christian is one connected through the heart to the whole of life and attuned to this deeper reality and intelligence of nature, called forth by the energies of love or the spirit to creatively express one's gifts in the evolution of self and world. We are, and this is the key here, we are the rising up of God in evolution. And I think that reality has yet to really enter into us and what that means for us. When our minds and hearts expand in love, God is born in us and through us into the universe. The world moves ever closer to Omega. Otherwise, what do we actually think God is? What are we thinking about our lives in relation to God? If not God being the depth dimension of our lives themselves. Which is what the mystery of Christ holds out for us. Sin is living in the exile of unrelatedness. It's not just brokenness, it's just the resistance to the whole. And for all sorts of reasons. One could, for all sorts of personal reasons, that one just cannot find that wholeness within oneself and therefore rejects that wholeness outside oneself. Or one that says, I don't want to be involved in this. I think this is all for rookie-dookie. I think this is just all, a bunch of gobbledygook. And I know who God is. We want always that certainty. And therefore, we have a choice. Deuteronomy says, I set before you life and death. You know, God never said, oh, really, please, please, do it this way. God's like, nope, you got to make a choice. What do you want? What do you want to be when you grow up? And so what Teilhard recognizes is that the choice for love is the choice for life. And to choose love is always to be on the move, on the way towards the fullness of life. By love, we mean that we will be willing to undergo the costs of love, the wages of love, which means suffering. It means death. It means persevering through the difficulties of life, trusting that through those difficulties, there's a power there that will not let us go, a power there that will be with us, that will always guide us and love us no matter what happens, and that God will always be the future for us, so that love, Teilhard says, will bring us to another universe. Love is what makes the world go round. Thanks.